Greek had been working at Brandon Chase's mansion for nearly 3 years. Dedicated to her job, she never imagined he would call her in for such an unexpected conversation. Brandon, a famous and cold businessman, was in the middle of a company crisis and needed to impress powerful investors at a business dinner that night. Lacking the time or patience to find a suitable companion, he glanced at Greek, who was polishing the shelves in his office, and said arrogantly, "I need you to accompany me to an important dinner tonight. This is not an invitation, it's an instruction. Go and behave. I need someone discreet and without an opinion of their own." Greek was surprised but didn't let it show. The request felt more like an order, but she sensed this was her chance to prove herself. Accepting the instruction, she already felt the growing tension and an opportunity awaiting her. This would not be an ordinary night. Arriving at the restaurant on time, Greek wore a beautiful, elegant dress. Brandon waited at the entrance, visibly impatient. He barely glanced at her, muttering a curt, "Let's go," as if she were an unnecessary accessory. As they entered the sophisticated restaurant, Greek felt the weight of every gaze. The investors were seated at a central table. Brandon introduced her vaguely and disinterestedly, not even mentioning her last name. "This is Greek. She's accompanying me tonight," he said quickly, looking away. The investors, men in suits with sharp, evaluating gazes, responded with polite smiles, though some exchanged puzzled looks. To them, Greek didn't seem to belong, and their silent judgment was evident. Greek noticed everything but maintained her composure. Throughout the dinner, Brandon and the investors discussed numbers, profits, and expansion plans. Greek remained silent, attentively observing and absorbing the details. At one point, Mr. Ryder, a tall man with an imposing demeanor, turned to her with a condescending smile. "So, Greek, how do you feel about attending a business dinner like this?" he asked, clearly expecting a timid response. Greek felt the tension around the table. She could have offered an insignificant response, but instead, she chose to assert herself. "Actually, it's fascinating to see how everything works up close," she said calmly. "Seeing the focus on financial details and projections is interesting, but I believe understanding the people behind the numbers is also essential." The room fell silent. Greek held her serene demeanor while Brandon shot her a sharp glance, a mix of surprise and irritation on his face. She had shown she had a voice, defying his earlier instructions. Mr. Ryder, taken aback, let out a short laugh, intrigued. "An interesting perspective," he said, as the other investors regarded her with newfound curiosity. Brandon's expression hardened, visibly uncomfortable with the attention Greek was drawing. The evening was turning into the opposite of what he had planned. As the conversation continued, Greek sensed Brandon's discomfort but remained steadfast. Mr. Ryder, however, appeared increasingly interested in including Greek in the discussion, perhaps because she broke the stereotype he expected at such events. When the conversation shifted to social responsibility, a topic that seemed to alienate Brandon further, Mr. Ryder asked provocatively, "Does Mr. Chase already consider social projects in his company?" Brandon hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. Before he could give a vague answer, Greek responded directly, her composure unwavering. "I believe social initiatives are a way to give back to the community for the success the company has achieved. After all, companies exist for more than just profit. It would be an important step." The table fell into silence once again. Greek felt every eye on her but maintained her poise. To her, this was about integrity. Mr. Ryder, clearly impressed, smiled. "Exactly what I think, Greek. It's rare to hear that around here," he said, his tone subtly provoking Brandon. Brandon's expression turned rigid. He had brought Greek to be invisible, and now she was the center of attention. Frustrated, he said with a smirk, "Well, it's easy to talk when you don't know the weight of leadership decisions, Greek. Don't you think you're speaking about something you don't understand?" Greek met his gaze, sensing the challenge. Instead of retreating, she replied firmly, "Maybe I don't know the weight of leadership decisions, but I understand their impact. Sometimes, those further from power see things that those at the top cannot." Her words were direct and unexpected. Mr. Ryder laughed, clearly impressed by her courage, while the other investors exchanged approving glances. Greek had changed the dynamics of the dinner within minutes. Brandon, feeling he had lost control, fell silent. He attempted to mask his discomfort, but the damage was already done. When the dinner concluded, Brandon stormed out without waiting for Greek. She, however, didn't need his company. She had stood her ground, made her voice heard, and left the evening knowing she had made her mark. Brandon couldn't let the events of the previous night go unaddressed. Back at the mansion, he was seething with irritation. The moment Greek walked through the door, he summoned her to his office. His eyes, sharp with frustration and disdain, cut through any pretense of formality. "What were you thinking, Greek?" he demanded, barely giving her time to sit. "I asked you to accompany me and be discreet, not become the center of attention." Greek, still composed despite the intensity of the evening, met his anger with calm resolve. She had anticipated this confrontation and knew it wouldn't end well, but she had no regrets. "I only answered a question, Mr. Brandon," she replied in a steady tone. "I simply expressed my opinion." "Opinion," he echoed, his disdain evident. "You're a housekeeper, Greek. You're not paid to have opinions at business dinners. You went too far, overstepping every boundary." She held her breath, the weight of his words pressing on her, though she didn't let it show. He didn't understand her motivations, her need to demonstrate she was more than the role he confined her to. "If my presence was so bothersome, why did you bring me there?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. "Don't twist this," Brandon retorted coldly. "You were there to do your job, and part of that job is knowing when to stay silent. Consider this your last day. You're fired." The words hung in the air like a final sentence. Greek didn't flinch. She rose gracefully, nodding once before turning and walking away, her dignity intact. As she stepped out of the mansion, she felt an unexpected sense of liberation. That night had shown her a truth she couldn't ignore. She was meant for more. The next morning, while packing her belongings, she received an unexpected call. It was Mr. Ryder, one of the investors from the dinner. He had been impressed by her assertiveness and offered her a position she had never dared to dream of. With a mix of shock and determination, she accepted. In the months that followed, Greek thrived under Ryder's guidance. She uncovered talents and leadership qualities that had been stifled in her previous role. Her colleagues admired her, and she quickly became a respected figure in the company. For the first time, she was in an environment where her voice was not only heard but valued. Meanwhile, Brandon's fortunes plummeted. His impulsive, short-sighted decisions and arrogance cost him crucial contracts and alienated business partners. His company teetered on the brink of collapse. The tables turned completely when Greek's new company acquired a significant share of Brandon's business, placing her in a leadership role with direct influence over his operations. Their paths crossed again at a high-profile meeting of executives. When Brandon entered the room and saw Greek seated at the table among the leaders, his face paled. He hesitated, staring at her in disbelief, as if struggling to reconcile her presence there. Greek met his gaze, calm and unflinching. After the meeting, Brandon confronted her, his voice tense with frustration. "Greek," he muttered, his disbelief evident, "you're really here with them?" "Yes, I am," she replied, her tone steady. "As you can see, our company now owns a significant stake in yours." "This is absurd," he scoffed, attempting to mask his insecurity. "Do you think that just because you have a position here, you know anything about real leadership?" Greek didn't flinch. "While working for you, Brandon, I learned exactly what not to do as a leader. It was a valuable lesson." He stepped closer, his face inches from hers, but she stood her ground. "Don't think this changes anything," he hissed. "You're still just a lucky housekeeper." Her eyes met his, unyielding. "That's the difference between us, Brandon. I don't need your respect to prove my worth. I've earned my place and it wasn't luck. You, on the other hand, are sinking because you never valued anything but yourself." For the first time, Brandon had no retort. Her words laid bare the flaws he had long ignored. The truth hit him harder than he anticipated. "I don't need anyone," he said, struggling to maintain his composure. "This company is mine and I'll prove it." Greek's expression softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "Then prove it," she replied. "Show that you can lead and save your empire." But remember, those who believe they know everything often fall the fastest. She left him standing there, her words echoing in his mind. Brandon felt an unfamiliar sense of doubt creeping in. Greek was no longer just someone he had dismissed, she was now a rival, a reminder of everything he had failed to see. Brandon's pride had always been his armor, but Greek's words stripped it away, leaving him face to face with his flaws. Her pointed critique lingered in his mind, forcing him to confront the mistakes that had pushed his company to the edge of bankruptcy. For the first time, he felt the weight of his arrogance, the same hubris that had alienated employees, partners, and even his own family. Instead of immediately plotting ways to save his business, Brandon spent the night reflecting on every rash decision and lost opportunity. Days later, he and Greek were summoned to an investor meeting that could determine the company's future. Brandon entered the room stiffly, trying to project confidence despite his frayed nerves. Greek was already there, calm and focused, reviewing documents. The lead investor wasted no time addressing the gravity of the situation, his tone sharp and unyielding. "Brandon, the state of your company is alarming. This is your last chance to prove you're capable of turning things around." Brandon swallowed the lump in his throat and began outlining his vision. Yet, as he spoke, it became evident his ideas were shallow and short-sighted, fixated on immediate profits. The investors exchanged skeptical glances, their doubts unspoken but clear. Greek, sensing the room's discontent, stepped in. "The focus of this company needs to change," she began, her voice steady. "It's no longer just about profit. We need to reconnect the brand with its people. That means prioritizing social responsibility and truly valuing our employees." The investors leaned in, intrigued. Encouraged by their interest, Greek elaborated on her strategy, emphasizing the importance of sustainable practices and long-term growth. Her confident demeanor and thoughtful proposals captured the room's attention. Brandon sat in silence, powerless. He saw the admiration in the investors' eyes as they listened to Greek, a stark contrast to their earlier skepticism. It became clear, she was saving the company he had nearly destroyed. After the meeting, as they left the conference room, Brandon stopped her in the hallway. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice low and edged with disbelief. "Why help me save this company?" Greek regarded him steadily, her expression calm but resolute. "Because unlike you, Brandon, I believe in the value of people. And more importantly, I believe in this company's potential for a better future, with or without you." Her words landed with a weight he couldn't ignore. For the first time, Brandon felt something beyond pride and frustration, a genuine desire to change. Yet, alongside that desire, a familiar impulse lingered, the need to prove himself. Tension simmered between them in the days that followed. Greek, with her composed demeanor and sharp insights, seemed to anticipate every move he made. It unnerved him, and though he admired her capabilities, he couldn't help but feel judged. When another critical meeting was scheduled with the board of investors, Brandon prepared a bold, independent proposal. He saw it as a chance to reclaim some of his authority and demonstrate his leadership. On the day of the meeting, Greek arrived early, meticulously ready with her presentation. Brandon, brimming with his own plan, waited for the right moment to interject. As Greek outlined her strategy, focused on stable growth and sustainable practices, it was clear the board was aligned with her vision. The room was leaning in her favor, but Brandon refused to back down. "I understand Greek's plan," he interrupted, "but I believe we need to take bolder steps. The market needs to see that we're entering a new phase." Greek turned to him, her expression a mix of disbelief and controlled disapproval. She knew this wasn't the time for ego. Maintaining her composure, she responded, "Brandon, you're aware this kind of aggressive approach has already caused serious issues for us. We're restructuring. Now is the time to prioritize our mission, not rush for rapid growth." The board members watched intently as the two clashed. Some nodded in agreement with Greek, while others seemed swayed by Brandon's argument. "The company needs visibility," Brandon pressed on. "Without it, we risk fading into mediocrity." Greek shook her head, her voice firm but calm. "What the company needs is consistency. The people we serve require a sustainable plan." We've moved beyond leading with the egos of individuals. The tension was palpable. Before the debate could escalate further, the board president, Mr. Haynes, intervened. Enough. Both of you will prepare a joint proposal for the next meeting. We need collaboration, not division. Greek nodded, her demeanor unshaken. Brandon, however, felt the sting of defeat. In that moment, he realized he no longer had control over the company he had built. As much as it pained him to admit, Greek's steady hand was now steering the ship he had nearly wrecked. Brandon sat in his dimly lit office, surrounded by a mountain of financial reports and notes. The weight of his decisions pressed heavily on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. The company he had built was slipping away, and despite his best efforts to save it, he seemed to only be digging the hole deeper. That night, as he combed through reports in search of a viable plan, a message from an old business contact lit up his phone. The man, a wealthy investor, proposed a deal. He would inject a significant amount of capital into the company in exchange for a small say in the direction of its social projects. To Brandon, it seemed like the perfect solution. He would secure the funding needed to demonstrate his leadership while showing Greek and the board that he could still make impactful decisions. Without consulting anyone, Brandon arranged a meeting with the investor the next day. By the end of their conversation, a contract was signed. Brandon felt triumphant. Finally, he had a tangible solution that could silence his critics and prove his worth. When Greek learned about the deal, her disappointment was immediate and unmistakable. She stormed into his office, catching him mid-video call with the investor. The tension in the air was electric as Brandon hastily ended the call, dreading the confrontation he knew was coming. "You made a deal without the board's approval?" Greek demanded, her voice sharp and her arms crossed tightly. "How could you do this, Brandon?" Brandon took a steadying breath. "Greek, it was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. We need this money to expand. I'm trying to save the company, just like you." Her expression hardened. "Save the company? Do you even realize how risky this is? You've handed an outsider influence over our social projects. What happens when he starts bending them to his own agenda?" "It's a calculated risk," Brandon argued. "He only has a small share and no real control. This is what leadership looks like, taking risks for the greater good." Greek's eyes narrowed. "And what about the values we promised to uphold? The commitment to transparency, to valuing people? This isn't leadership, Brandon. This is impulsive self-interest disguised as strategy." Her words hit him like a blow. Vulnerable yet resentful, he snapped, "Why do you always expect me to fail? I'm trying, Greek. I'm doing everything I can." Greek softened slightly but held her ground. "It's not about wanting you to fail, Brandon. It's about showing you that leadership isn't just about bold moves. It's about responsibility, trust, and collaboration. Acting in secret only proves you haven't learned that." For a moment, Brandon looked away, the weight of her words sinking in. "Maybe I'll never understand it the way you want," he admitted. Greek nodded, her expression unreadable. "Maybe. But until you do, you'll keep breaking the promises you've made. And that's a burden that will only get heavier." 2 weeks later, the board convened to discuss the contract Brandon had signed without approval. The atmosphere was heavy with concern, and Greek was the first to voice her objections. "This contract undermines the principles we've worked so hard to establish," she said firmly. "Allowing external influence over our social projects risks compromising everything we stand for." The board president, Mr. Haynes, turned to Brandon. "Explain your decision," he demanded. Brandon swallowed hard. "I believed the investment would give us the financial strength we need for sustainable growth. It was a necessary risk." Mr. Haynes's expression darkened. "This isn't just about finances, Brandon. This company has a social mission, and your decision was impulsive and short-sighted." Brandon glanced at Greek, whose disapproving gaze felt like a final judgment. He realized in that moment that he had not only lost the board's trust but also his last chance to prove he had changed. By the end of the meeting, the board decided to curtail Brandon's authority over future decisions, effectively sidelining him. As he left the room in silence, a crushing sense of defeat settled over him. That night, Brandon returned home to the emptiness of his once proud estate. The walls seemed colder, the space lonelier than ever. Everything he had built now felt hollow. He knew the blame lay squarely on his own shoulders. The next morning, Brandon arrived at the office early, consumed by regret and a desperate need for clarity. Sitting alone at his desk, surrounded by the remnants of his ambitions, he began to confront the truth. His selfishness and impulsiveness had brought him here. If he truly wanted to change, he would have to let go of the ego that had guided him for so long. In the quiet of his office, Brandon began to understand that leadership wasn't about commanding control or making grand gestures. It was about humility, collaboration, and the courage to admit when you're wrong. For the first time, he saw that Greek hadn't been trying to undermine him. She had been trying to show him a better way. Brandon sat in his quiet office, lost in thought. For the first time, he deeply examined his decisions and the path that had led him here. Greek's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk, you're still treating this company like a profit machine. Asterisk, he hadn't fully understood them before, but now, they weighed on him. He began to question whether he had ever truly grasped the essence of leadership or if he had merely been playing a role, a cold, calculating businessman focused solely on numbers. The empty office around him felt symbolic. Leadership, he realized, wasn't about wielding control or driving profits. It was about people, the ones who had always been more than just entries on a spreadsheet. As these thoughts sank in, Greek appeared at the door. Her expression was serious, but there was no coldness this time. Perhaps she saw his vulnerability. Brandon looked up, tired of the endless disputes and walls between them. He decided to be honest. Greek, he began hesitantly, I know I've made a lot of mistakes. I know my decisions have hurt people in ways I can't undo. I understand if you think it's not worth trying anymore. Greek crossed her arms but didn't interrupt. Her silence felt less like judgment and more like a willingness to listen. It's a start, Brandon, she finally said, her tone softer than he expected. But recognizing your mistakes isn't enough. What do you plan to do about it? Brandon sighed heavily. He didn't have all the answers. I don't know, he admitted. I just know I can't keep going like this. Greek nodded, her expression thoughtful. Real change takes practice. It's not about control. It's about trust, humility, and service. Are you willing to learn that? Brandon hesitated but then nodded. Yes, I'm willing. I don't think I can do it alone. Greek offered a small, understanding smile. No one can, Brandon. True leadership is built in partnership. You have to trust people. You have to believe in something beyond yourself. Her words lingered in his mind long after she left. For years, he had tried to control everything himself, believing that trust was a weakness. Now, he began to see that trust might be the key he had been missing all along. Later that week, Greek took Brandon to visit one of the company's social projects, a program aimed at empowering women in vulnerable situations to enter the workforce. The community setting was a stark contrast to the luxury and formality Brandon was used to. It felt raw, real, and deeply uncomfortable. During a meeting with the women involved in the project, Brandon listened to their stories, single mothers, survivors of abuse, and others struggling to rebuild their lives. Each story hit him harder than the last. These weren't just abstract figures in a report, they were lives that depended on every opportunity the company could provide. After the meeting, an elderly woman approached him. Her gray hair and kind but piercing eyes gave her an air of wisdom. You're Mr. Brandon Chase, right? The owner of the company behind this project. Brandon nodded, feeling uncharacteristically shy. Yes, that's me. The woman studied him for a moment. My son worked for you years ago. He was let go without explanation after years of dedication. It broke him. He lost his motivation, his confidence. Brandon felt a lump in his throat. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. She shook her head slowly. Maybe you never cared to know. But seeing you here today, maybe things are changing. I just hope it's real. Her words pierced him. For years, he had caused harm without even realizing it. He had been the man Greek described, someone blind to the value of people. Back at the office, still shaken, Brandon sought out Greek. Thank you for taking me there, he said earnestly. Today, I finally understood what you meant. Greek looked at him, her eyes soft with understanding. This is just the beginning, Brandon. Change takes time and action. But if you're committed, you'll start to see that to lead is to serve. Encouraged by Greek, Brandon attended a meeting with the team managing the social projects. It was a chance to listen to their concerns and suggestions, something he had always neglected. As he entered the room, he felt the weight of their gazes. Some were distrustful, others seemed cautiously hopeful. Greek nudged him to speak, but Brandon hesitated. For the first time, he realized that listening might be more important than talking. The meeting began with each team member sharing their views, and Brandon sat quietly, absorbing their words. With each story and suggestion, Brandon felt a new understanding of leadership taking root, a kind of leadership that wasn't about control, but about connection. It wasn't about commanding, but about serving. And for the first time, he felt that he was on the right path. Brandon sat in the meeting room, listening intently as the team discussed the challenges facing the social project. Mark, a young and passionate team member, spoke with conviction. "We need consistency," he said, his tone firm but respectful. "The social project can't be treated like a short-term investment. These people rely on us, and that requires commitment and patience." Brandon absorbed Mark's words, feeling the weight of his past decisions. For the first time, he realized the team didn't see him as an obstacle but as someone who could help, if only he chose to. They shared a vision for the project to succeed, not for profit, but for meaningful and lasting impact. It was a perspective Brandon had overlooked for too long. Determined to change, Brandon decided to immerse himself in the project, not as a leader giving orders, but as a learner seeking understanding. Greek joined him on visits to the communities served by the initiative, guiding him to see its impact firsthand. During one visit, Brandon met Julia, a young mother whose life had been transformed by the program. She spoke emotionally about how the training had helped her secure a job and provide for her daughter. Her gratitude and resilience struck a chord in Brandon, leaving him with a lump in his throat. Julia's story made it clear, this wasn't just a project on paper. It was about people, their struggles, and their triumphs. Back at the office, Brandon sought out Greek. His voice was steady but filled with humility. "You were right, Greek. I treated this project like a tool to boost my image and climb back to the top. But today, I see how wrong I was." Greek regarded him thoughtfully. "So, what will you do now?" He took a deep breath. "I want to learn. I want to do this the right way. To serve and truly make a difference. I want everyone involved in these projects to find something I never had, real leadership." Greek nodded, her expression serious but hopeful. "Then show us. Not with words, but with actions. Every decision, every conversation, prove you've changed." In the weeks that followed, Brandon committed himself fully to the project. He joined team meetings, visited communities, and engaged with the participants. Slowly, his role shifted. No longer the boss dictating orders, he became a collaborator, listening and learning. One day, he met Anna, a middle-aged woman who had lost her job and found a new start through the program. Anna shared her struggles and how the initiative had restored her dignity. "It's more than a job for me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's a new life. For the first time, I feel like someone believes in me." Her words stayed with Brandon, a poignant reminder of the impact of the work. He wasn't just helping individuals find jobs, he was helping rebuild lives. The realization deepened his commitment. As weeks turned into months, the change in Brandon became evident to everyone around him. The board noticed his transformation, how he listened more, acted less impulsively, and prioritized the team's input. Greek observed him closely, cautious but quietly proud of his progress. For Brandon, the project was no longer a stepping stone for personal gain. It had become a mission. He learned the participants' names, tracked their progress, and celebrated their successes. His sincerity and dedication began to win over even the skeptics on the board. The project's results soon became visible, not just in reports, but in the lives of those it touched. The once distant businessman had found a new purpose. Leadership, he discovered, wasn't about power or prestige. It was about service, humility, and creating opportunities for others. One day, as Greek passed his office, Brandon stopped her. "Thank you," he said, his voice earnest. For not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it? Greek smiled softly. Leadership is a long road, Brandon. But if you truly commit to it, you'll find its real value. Brandon nodded, feeling the truth in her words. This journey wasn't about proving himself anymore. It was about building something that mattered, one decision, one action, and one life at a time. Brandon stood in the boardroom, presenting the latest updates on the social project. His tone was calm and measured, a far cry from the boastful demeanor he once displayed. He emphasized the team's collective efforts and made sure to highlight Greek's critical contributions. The data he shared painted a clear picture of success, and for the first time, the board members looked at him with genuine approval. Mr. Haynes, the board chairman, leaned forward, nodding. Brandon, you've handled this project with a seriousness many of us didn't expect. This pilot program is a success, and I believe we can expand it sustainably. Brandon offered a modest smile, grateful for the recognition. He knew deep down that much of his growth was thanks to Greek. She had been more than a mentor, she had been his guide, showing him what true leadership meant. As time passed, their professional relationship began to shift. Brandon started to see Greek in a different light. She wasn't just a brilliant leader but a remarkable person, strong, principled, and passionate about her work. During their community visits, he found himself admiring how naturally she connected with people, how her kindness and sincerity made others feel seen and valued. At one such visit, the project's beneficiaries organized a small celebration to thank the team. Brandon watched as Greek moved through the crowd, her warmth drawing people to her effortlessly. She really understands them, he thought, a newfound admiration settling in his chest. As the event wound down, Brandon offered to walk Greek back to the office. The quiet streets of the community provided a rare moment of introspection. Curious about what fueled her unwavering dedication, he asked, Greek, what drives you to be so deeply involved in this work? Her smile was genuine, lighting up her face. I've always felt the need to do something beyond myself. Growing up, I saw people close to me face hardships, and it left a mark. Helping others rebuild their lives feels like the best way to give meaning to mine. Her words touched Brandon in ways he hadn't anticipated. For him, this project had started as a tool for reputation and legacy, but for Greek, it was deeply personal, a mission. He realized that her passion gave the work its heart, and he was beginning to understand the depth of the extraordinary woman beside him. In the weeks that followed, Brandon and Greek worked even closer together. Their partnership, once formal and tentative, transformed into an easy camaraderie filled with mutual respect and admiration. They shared ideas, strategized late into the night, and supported one another through every challenge. But Brandon began to notice a change in himself. He didn't just admire Greek's brilliance, he was falling in love with her. It was a quiet, unexpected realization. He found himself drawn to her laughter, her conviction, and the way she inspired everyone around her. She was the anchor he hadn't known he needed, a steady force urging him to be better. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, their conversation drifted from work to more personal topics. The office was quiet, the city's lights twinkling through the windows. Brandon leaned back in his chair, his voice soft. Greek, I owe you everything I've learned these past months. You showed me that success isn't about control or expansion, it's about building something that matters. Greek blinked, momentarily surprised by the depth of his words. I'm glad this work has meant something to you, Brandon. Seeing this change in you, it's one of the most rewarding things I've ever experienced. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them felt charged, alive with unspoken emotions. Brandon hesitated, unsure of whether to act on the feelings that had grown steadily within him. He didn't want to jeopardize their work or the trust they had built. As the days passed, Brandon found himself drawn to Greek even more. He noticed the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the project, the small gestures of kindness she showed to everyone around her. She wasn't just a remarkable leader, she was someone who brought depth and meaning to his life. One late night, as they worked side by side in the office, Brandon couldn't help but blurt out, "You know, you're one of the most amazing people I've ever met." Greek laughed softly, her eyes reflecting surprise and gratitude. Thank you, Brandon. But I think you've changed a lot too. You've become someone truly admirable. Her words warmed him, and he realized the truth of his feelings. This wasn't a fleeting attraction, it was something deeper. He admired her strength, respected her vision, and wanted to share the same mission with her. Greek had shown him the value of leading with purpose and heart, and now, he couldn't imagine this journey without her by his side. That night, as Brandon walked home, he felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't just want to lead the project successfully, he wanted to build something meaningful with Greek. And perhaps, if she felt the same, they could build something meaningful together. Brandon realized that the transformation Greek had brought about in him wasn't just professional, it had touched his heart. He knew, no matter what the future held, his life would never be the same. The days went by, and his connection with Greek grew deeper. What had started as a professional partnership began to evolve into something much more personal, a closeness that developed with each passing day. Once driven by ego and the desire for power, Brandon now found himself sharing moments of vulnerability and authenticity with Greek. He felt lighter, more alive, and above all, more complete. Greek, too, noticed the change in Brandon. As they spent more time together, she could see how genuine his transformation was. He was no longer the man driven by ambition and status, but someone who wanted to build something that truly mattered. His determination to redeem himself impressed her in ways she hadn't expected, and gradually, her heart opened to him. In the weeks that followed, Brandon found small ways to be closer to Greek. He invited her to lunch after meetings, suggested walks together at the end of long days, and always made time for conversations beyond work. They shared stories about their lives, their fears, and their dreams, and slowly, the line between professional and personal began to blur. They found themselves in a space where their feelings were clear, though unspoken. One evening, after another intense day at the project, Brandon and Greek stayed late in the office to review a final report. The dim light and quiet of the night created a peaceful, almost intimate atmosphere. They sat side by side, their arms almost touching, and Brandon felt a wave of tenderness wash over him. He couldn't help himself, he needed to thank her. "I wanted to thank you," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "For everything, for teaching me, for believing in me even when I didn't deserve it." Greek looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "You don't need to thank me, Brandon," she said softly. "The change came from you. I just showed you the way." Brandon smiled, but there was more he wanted to say, something he'd been holding in for days. His heart was racing as he decided it was time to be honest. "Greek," he began, his voice shaky but determined. "I can't hide what I feel anymore. The truth is, I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Greek was silent, her eyes locked on his. Brandon's heartbeat quickened, and he feared he had made a mistake by revealing his feelings. But then Greek smiled softly, her eyes shining. "I'm in love with you too, Brandon," she confessed, her voice full of sincerity. "For some time now, I've been feeling this way, but I was afraid of how it might affect everything we've built together." Brandon laughed, a relieved and emotional laugh. "I had the same fear," he admitted. "But I can't pretend these feelings don't exist anymore. I want to be with you, truly, not just as work partners, but as something more." Greek nodded, still smiling. "I want that too. I think we're finally ready. Ready for something more." They moved closer, and as their lips met in a gentle, intense kiss, all the barriers between them fell away. It was a moment of pure connection, one that sealed their decision to begin something together. After that night, their relationship blossomed naturally. They started going out together outside of work, exploring the city, sharing dinners and outings. Every moment was an opportunity to get to know each other on a deeper level. As they spent more time together, they realized how well they complemented each other. At work, their dynamic remained professional and focused, but the team could sense the spark between them. Greek and Brandon made it clear that despite their relationship, their commitment to the project would remain the priority. However, it was clear that the love they shared fueled their dedication to the work, bringing a new energy and sense of purpose to everything they did. Over the next months, The project continued to thrive. The local community saw job opportunities and personal growth that had once seemed impossible, and the project began expanding into new regions. The company gained recognition for its positive, sustainable impact, and the board was pleased with the progress. Finally, Mr. Haynes, always a tough critic, congratulated Brandon in a meeting. "Brandon, you've shown us that it's possible to change and learn," he said. "The project is a success, and much of that is due to your commitment and vision. I'm proud to say you are a true leader now." Brandon smiled, humbled by the recognition, knowing that the journey had been long and challenging. But he also knew that the road ahead, with Greek by his side, held the promise of something even greater. Brandon glanced at Greek sitting beside him, feeling a deep wave of gratitude for everything she had done for him. Without her, he knew he wouldn't have come this far. Outside of work, their relationship continued to grow, and it was clear that their bond was genuine and deep. They were happy together, and Brandon found himself thinking more and more about building a future with her. He could tell that Greek felt the same way. One sunny afternoon, as they walked through a park, Brandon held Greek's hand and stopped, looking directly into her eyes. "I never thought I would find someone like you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've changed my life, Greek, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." Greek smiled, her eyes filling with tears of joy. "I want that too, Brandon. You're not the same man I met at first. You're so much better, and I love you for who you've become." Brandon smiled, overcome with emotion, and kissed her right there in the park, surrounded by the sounds of rustling leaves and children laughing. It was the beginning of a new journey for both of them, one that would be as challenging as it was rewarding. But this time, they knew they would face everything together. The project continued to grow, and the company became an example of social responsibility and ethical leadership. Brandon and Greek took on co-leadership roles, working side by side to ensure the positive impact spread to new communities. They became known not just as successful leaders but also as an inspiring couple, proving that love, ethics, and dedication could transform lives and build something truly meaningful. The company received numerous awards and media praise for its social impact, but for Brandon and Greek, the true legacy lay in the lives they helped change. Financial success was important, but it faded in comparison to the joy of seeing families thrive, people starting over, and dreams being realized through the work they had started together. Months later, they got married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by friends, colleagues, and community members they had helped transform. As they exchanged vows of love and commitment, they made promises not just of romantic love but also of continuing to work together for a better world. They committed to leading with their hearts and building a legacy that would transcend their own lives. That night, as they danced under the stars, Brandon realized how much his life had changed. The man who once sought success at all costs now understood that true value lay in building something with purpose and passion, alongside the woman he loved. Together, Brandon and Greek began a new chapter, not just in their own lives but in a legacy that would continue to inspire and transform for many years to come.